And if you can grab me that table from that back corner, that would be amazing. Hey, it is great to have you guys here today, and I'm praying that the Holy Spirit is going to guide us in this message. I believe that the Holy Spirit's already been speaking as we've been worshiping. Did you enjoy the worship this morning? Man, just amazing. I love it. What a talented worship team we have here this morning. We've been going through this journey, and this journey of Jesus fixing his face towards Jerusalem, and in the book of Mark, going throughout his journey, that one-way trip to Jerusalem. And because of what Jesus did at Easter, we can live life to the fullest. John 10:10 says that Jesus came to give us life and have it more abundantly, a life to the fullest. And that's what we really believe. And that's what we're guiding towards, watching Jesus go towards this death and resurrection so that we could truly live. Today, we're going to talk about an ordinary woman, just a regular ordinary woman. The Bible doesn't give us any kind of special talents or gifts that she has, just a regular woman who did something extraordinary. She did her best for Jesus, and because she did her best, she gave her best, it made a huge impact. And we're still talking about it today. She gave her best. And for me, I love that feeling. I love the feeling of giving my best. And so I want you to think about that for a little while. When have you had a time where you just gave your best? You gave 100%. You went all into something. And maybe it worked out, maybe it didn't. But you had the feeling that you have given your best. I love that feeling because and I like to say, I know it's a cliche, but when I give my best, I'm just going to let God do the rest, right? When I give my best, I can just be at peace with the results because I've gone all in. I've done everything I could, and God can take the results and do with them what He will have do. And sometimes the results are great, and sometimes not great. And I like to do this with my faith. I like to do this with my family. I like to do this with my hobbies. All right, so think about the hobbies that you have. If you have one particular hobby, something that you really love doing, maybe it's a pastime, maybe it's a sport, maybe it's an instrument, right? There's something about when we give our best to that hobby that makes us feel good. So I had the opportunity to do that this week. I was hanging out with our national director for our denomination, a guy named Aaron Box. He's the same age as me, and something we have in common, we both have the same hobby of snowboarding. I met him about a year ago, and we instantly, right away, started talking snowboarding. And he said, Chris, I've got to get out, come down to the Sierras and snowboard. So he did this week. He came down to the Sierras, and we spent a couple days at Mammoth snowboarding. And we've got the same mentality. When I go down the slope on my snowboard, I can't just go down. I can't just relax and do that. I've got to push myself to the limits. I really do, and that's just how I'm wired, and he's wired the same way. So we made a dangerous combo out there on the slopes. And so after one run in particular, we were timing all our stats, right? He pulled out his Apple Watch, and he said, okay, Chris, we went 47 miles per hour down that slope. I wonder if we can hit 60. And I said, oh, yeah, we can. Let's go, right? And so our fastest time was 57 miles an hour, so we almost hit that 60 miles an hour. And then I'm sitting there watching all the young kids on the snowboard park, right? If you know anything about snowboarding, there's like rails and these metal things and these big jumps and a half pipe. They had 2 half pipes there. And I'm watching all these kids on that thing, and I'm not going to leave here until I hit those things, right? I'm not going to leave. Aaron, I cannot leave without hitting that rail, doing that big jump, and getting into that half pipe, right? So, and for me, that's just like, I've got to do it. I've got to give 100%. I've got to push myself, and I wasn't nearly as graceful as all those kids out there were. And at one time, this happened actually a while ago, I was doing the similar thing. I just can't sit still. I've got to do what those kids are doing, right? And this one kid looked up to me. He said, how old are you? Right? And so, but that's just my mentality. I've got to give 100%. And then, if I give 100% and fail, that's all right. I gave it all. I gave 100%. I can leave the slopes feeling good about that. You guys, honestly, I try to do that in my sermons, right? And I will tell you guys that in 30 years, I've never gotten up on the stage unprepared or unexcited. I really haven't. Now, a time may come when I do. Hold on, I don't know. A time may come when I come unprepared and unexcited, but so far in 30 years, I never have. Now, there's all kinds of communicators that are way better than me. I follow all kinds of pastors that are incredible communicators, and sometimes I can do a sermon and it might land flat, and that happens. You guys probably nodding and agree, yeah, that happens, Chris, every now and then. But it's not for a lack of giving my all, right? I've given 100%, and that's what I believe God has called us to do. God has called us to take our talents and our abilities and what we've been gifted in life and our relationships and our faith and give 100%. And we're not perfect, right? We're not the best at everything, but if we can take what God has given us and do the very best we have with that, God honors that. Right? God honors that. And we can have peace knowing that we've given our best. I've given it to God. I've done my best in this circumstance. And I'm just going to be at peace with what happens with that. And we do that in all kinds of areas. We do that in parenting. Right? In parenting, hey, we don't know how to parent. Right? I mean, we have to work our way into it. Right? Rebecca and I, we read the books before we had kids, right? We were about to have kids. We read the books and all this, and they think, okay, we think we know what we're doing. Let's become a family. And then we quickly realize that, man, I don't know if we know what we're doing at all, but we gave our best, right? And we're still giving our best. And don't you wish for you guys who maybe have kids who are adults, don't you wish now on the other side where you've gained all that wisdom, you could go back and reapply that wisdom back but we can't, right? But we give our best, right? We give our best and let God do the rest with that. The same thing with our marriages, right? None of us are the perfect spouse or have the perfect spouse. I'm not a psychologist, right? I'm not a relational expert. I've got my gifting in different areas. I'm not a counselor, but I want to give my best in my marriage. And that's the question, right? Are we giving our best? Or are we just kind of calling it in, right? And giving the bare minimum? Because that's the temptation. Students in school, right? I really believe that A's come from effort, not from IQ, right? A's come from effort. I believe it. And I believe that students, right, are you giving 100%, right? Because I believe when we do give 100%, regardless of your IQ or that person has more brain power than I do or whatever, you're going to get great results when you give 100%. So this is what we learn from Mark chapter 14 today. And we're going to be in verses 1 through 11. And we learn about this lady, this young woman who gave 100%. She gave everything she got. And it had amazing results because she gave her best and God did the rest. A little context before we get into Mark chapter 14. 2 weeks ago we were in Mark chapter 8 as Jesus turned his face steadfastly towards Jerusalem and went from Galilee in the north and headed to the south to Jerusalem, and he traveled along that way. And as he traveled, he taught people and he told people, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. I'm going to Jerusalem to die, but I'm going to be raised back to life again. And he made that first bold, clear prediction in chapter 8. And then as he goes along, last week in chapter 10, he had already made his third prediction. 3 times he tells people, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to Jerusalem. And he was a lot closer to Jerusalem. He was almost there. He said, when I get to Jerusalem, I'm going to die. And in chapter 10, he got really graphic and specific. He said, I'm going to get flogged. I'm going to get spit on. I'm going to die. But after 3 days, I'll be raised again. And then he goes into Jerusalem in chapter 11. We'll come back to that on Palm Sunday. But here we are in chapter 14. And in chapter 14, he's already been in Jerusalem and gotten himself in a lot of trouble. Right? He went into Jerusalem and he went in on Palm Sunday, chapter 11, to the shouts of Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He came into Jerusalem as a king. And the tension with the religious leaders was just building and building and building. And as Jesus came to Jerusalem, he came like a tidal wave, right? He came with crowds, and he was at the height of his popularity, and everyone was cheering for Jesus. He was the most popular rabbi they had ever seen. As he comes into Jerusalem, Jerusalem was in the middle of a festival. It was a week-long festival of unleavened bread, which led to the final day, which was Passover. So it was in the festival of unleavened bread already, and Jerusalem had swelled its population from 50,000 to 250,000. This place was packed. Absolutely packed. People were everywhere, and Jesus was the center of attention. And these religious leaders just saw the power slipping from their grasp, right? It was just going. Jesus had all the momentum. And then he came in and he started flipping tables in the temple, right? That was their temple. This was Jerusalem, the head of the Pharisees, the head of the religious leaders, and Jesus is flipping tables because there's a bunch of thieves and robbers cheating the poor people, right, and making a profit off the poor so they could do sacrifices in the temple, and Jesus wasn't going to have any of it. So not only was he the most popular rabbi ever, he had all the tidal wave of attention. Then he started taking their profit because those Pharisees were profiting from those money changers there in the temple as well. So they were ready to kill him literally. And that's where we get to chapter 14, verses 1 through 11. There's so much to talk about in Holy Week that we could talk about it for months, but we're going to talk about it right up to Easter. So Mark chapter 14, verse 1 says this. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. Right? Jesus was a bigger threat to them than Rome itself. They saw Jesus, one of their own people, as a biggest threat, and they were willing to kill their own rabbi in order to keep their power. But verse 2, but not during the festival, they said, or the people will riot. 250,000 people packed into Jerusalem. Jesus is the center of attention. Wherever he goes, he's healing people. He's teaching as one who had authority, right? We can't get Jesus without being very smart, because he's the center of the population right now. He's the center of attention. We've got to somehow try to turn these people, because if we kill him right now, there's going to be a riot. The thing about Jesus, and this is what I love about Jesus, he was in touch with the common people, right? These Pharisees and religious leaders, they were above the common people. They were above the regular people. Jesus was with the regular people. He was with them. And you see this all through the Gospels. Jesus is hanging out with the regular, common, ordinary folks, and they all love him. And the Pharisees, they're jealous of Jesus because he's got all their attention, but they don't want to actually be with those common people, right? They're above them, but they're also jealous of Jesus because he has all the momentum. You guys, I don't know about you, I love a leader who's in touch with the regular people. Don't you? I mean, I really do. I want a leader who can communicate with regular people. I don't want a leader who's above and better than everybody, right? And you see this, I'll take a step into the fray for a minute. You see this in politics all the time, right? Politicians strive to be seen as the one who's in touch with the common folk, right? They should, and some of them don't do very good, and other ones do, right? They've got maybe a natural connection. I don't know if you remember way back in 2008, it was Obama versus McCain, and there was one of the most famous people in that campaign was Joe the plumber. Do you remember that? I don't know if anybody remembers Joe the plumber, but it was fascinating to me because Joe the plumber, he was an actual plumber, right, in the Midwest, and he was at an Obama event, and he asked Obama a question, and he didn't like the answer, and this was filmed, right? And so McCain jumped on that and said, I want Joe the plumber for me if he doesn't agree with Obama. And then pretty soon Joe the plumber was on tour, and he was on Good Morning America, and he was on CNN, and Joe the plumber was everywhere, right? Sometimes you forgot who's running again. I know that Joe the plumber's involved here somewhere, but it's always that challenge to connect with the regular people because we like people, leaders who connect with the regular people. That was Jesus. Jesus would have been a buddy with Joe the plumber, right? Because Jesus hung around with the people who had been healed of leprosy and the women and the tax collectors and Simon the Zealot, who was a reformed terrorist. I mean, Jesus hung around with the regular, common people. And that's why people loved him. He wasn't above them, he was with them. And that's why the Pharisees hated him. So, verse 3. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, see, there he is, the common people. The Pharisees would have never been in the home of Simon the leper. He's in Bethany, which is 2 miles from Jerusalem. So he was in Jerusalem a lot, but Jerusalem was packed. There's no room in Jerusalem. So he would retreat out to Bethany where all his friends were, and he'd hang around with the disciples and his friends and Simon the leper and all kinds of regular common folk there in Bethany. And a woman came with an alabaster jar. Here's the entrance of the woman who we're talking about. A very expensive perfume made of pure nard. Now, the woman, this account is in the other Gospels as well. So different Gospels give different details about this same event, right? And in the book of John, John identifies this woman as Mary. And this is Mary, who's sister to Martha, who's brother to Lazarus. These are some of Jesus' best friends. I mean, these are core people. We know the disciples were core, but Jesus had lots of friends as well. And these people were followers of Jesus. And they'd follow him everywhere, but they weren't the 12. They were just really good friends. So that was the same Mary that we've read about in other parts in the Bible. And this pure nard, this is super interesting because nard was made of a very rare plant root only found in the Himalayas. I find that super fascinating. That's why it was so expensive. There's this rare plant way up in China and India nowadays, right? Up in the Himalayas, they would take this plant, crush up the roots, a long process to make this super rare perfume. And so it was worth a fortune, right? I don't know if you're Marvel or DC fans, Batman stole that theme in one of the Batman movies. There was some rare plant up in the Himalayas, and that kind of turned Batman into Batman, right? They stole that from this story, right? They stole that from the Bible, right? But good things come out of the Bible, right? And so this pure nard, and when she broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head, when you would break that jar, it had a long neck on it, and you broke that off. When you broke that off, the expiry date was ticking, right? Just like we do, when you open something, the expiry date is ticking on that item, right? So she broke it off. It was just like, you're committed now. It's all, and she used it all, right? Might as well just use it all on Jesus, and she anointed Jesus with this incredibly expensive perfume. And this had 2 symbols to it. The one symbol was, this is what you did to kings, right? Kings would be anointed with incredibly expensive oils and perfumes. So that was a normal thing to do for kings. And she was treating Jesus like the king. Just like he had come in on Palm Sunday, he was treated like the king. She's just following suit. She's treating him as the king. And there's another powerful symbol, but Jesus would bring that up in a subsequent verse. Verse 4. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? Can you imagine that? Why are you wasting the perfume on Jesus? How blind were these disciples, right? And these were some of the disciples saying this. The disciples were sounding like Pharisees. They were sounding like the religious leaders, right? They still didn't get it. Is there anything too expensive so that it would be a waste on Jesus, right? I mean, you're not wasting anything of value when you're giving it to Jesus. That's never a waste. Verse 5 says, it could have been sold for more than a year's wages, 300 denarii was it, a year's wages, and the money could have been given to the poor. Right? The book of John says the person saying this was Judas, right? The one who would betray Jesus. And John even gives us a side note. He was saying this because he was a thief, and he would skim off the top. So did Judas really want that for the poor? No, he didn't want that for the poor. He wanted that for himself, right? He wanted to skim off the top. We could sell that perfume, give it to the poor, but he knew he would skim. He would be dipping into the money purse and taking money for himself. So he didn't like that. It was going to the wrong person. And they rebuked her harshly. Just imagine that. Mary gives everything she has, a year's worth of wages. This might have been a family heirloom. It might have been like a 401k that we would have, right? Mary empties out her retirement savings account and just pours it out to Jesus. So first of all, that's a big act of sacrifice, right? That's a big act of giving. That's as generous as she could give. She gave everything she got. Then she got rebuked harshly for that, right? But Mary is no stranger to this. This is the same Mary who got rebuked earlier in the Gospels because she was at Jesus' feet. Same Mary. She was at Jesus' feet in the living room of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And Jesus was teaching, and she was taking the teaching. That to sit at the feet of a rabbi meant that you were a student of the rabbi, right? And she was just soaking it in. And Martha came out of the kitchen, right, and yelled at her. You know, Mary, come on, you're being lazy. I'm doing all the work, right? You should come in here in the kitchen and help me feed all these guests. And Jesus stood up for her back then. Jesus is standing up for her now. What she is doing is the right thing. And Jesus at the time with Mary, the Mary and Martha incident, Jesus said to Martha, Martha, come on. I'm only going to be with you a short while. Mary's doing what is right. And Jesus says the same thing. He comes to the rescue of Mary, who's always getting in trouble by being too much focused on Jesus, right? And after all, verse 6, Jesus says, leave her alone. Guys, cut it out. Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. See, what is the beautiful thing that Mary did? Mary made a sacrifice. There's something about sacrifice. God honors sacrifice. And this is all through the Bible, right from Genesis to Revelation. This is one of the many themes that are concurrent. They run all through. It's a thread of truth that runs all through the Bible. God honors sacrifice. It's one of the key themes of the whole book. Right? In the beginning, with Genesis, and when the sacrificial system comes into place, they honored sacrifice. And they would sacrifice what? They would sacrifice the best of what they had on the altar to God in the tabernacle or the temple. Excuse me. They would take the unblemished lamb. They would take the best of their herd. They would take the biggest sacrifice and give God their best. When they were giving their offerings of their crops, they would give their first fruits, not their last leftovers, right? They didn't give some roadkill in the ditch on the altar, right? They took their best and gave that as a sacrifice. That's what they did. That's why God said, I'm going to give you my best sacrifice, and that's my one and only Son, Jesus. That's why Mary's gift was honored, because she gave everything she had. She could have poured some cooking oil on Jesus, and that would have been still an anointing. They did that, right? They anointed people with regular oil, but that's not a sacrifice. That Mary gave her best. God honors sacrifice. And sometimes we look at the Old Testament and we look at that sacrifice thing and we think like, oh, that's weird that people sacrifice to God and that people do that. That must be some ancient ritual. Why does God enjoy a sacrifice? Well, we all do, don't we? We appreciate it when someone sacrifices for us. We have this saying in our culture that we honor the sacrifices that people give towards others for our country, right? We honor the sacrifices that people make. What started with God is embedded in all of our hearts as well. We honor sacrifice. When someone gives their time, their effort to a cause that we enjoy or to us, we honor the sacrifice. That's because we're made in the image of God, and sacrifice is to be honored. That's a good thing. And Mary sacrificed everything she had financially for Jesus. He doesn't want the leftovers. He doesn't want the excess. He wants sacrifice, because sacrifice means more. Verse 7. Jesus says, and he's referring back to Judas, who said, we could have given that money to the poor, and Jesus doesn't really call him out on it. But Jesus said, the poor you'll always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. And some people take this verse and say, well, see, we don't have to give to the poor then, because Jesus said that wasn't important. Well, Jesus, obviously, if you read about him, he was passionate about the poor, right? He wasn't saying that. That's missing the point. He was saying that you're always going to have an opportunity to help the poor, so you better always be helping the poor, because they're not going to go away. You're never going to solve that issue, but I'm here and now. The gospel is about something bigger than the poor, right? Jesus was here to do something more important than just help the poor. The gospel is a benefit to the poor, but Jesus came to bring salvation for everybody, right? He said, no, it's bigger than the poor, and what Mary has done is important. Yeah, you could have sold that and given to the poor. You wouldn't have, but you could have. But what I'm doing right now is bigger than that. Verse 8. And this sentence, this first sentence in verse 8, really for me, it's the diamond in the whole passage. For me, this one sentence, I just love. For me, it's the center of this passage. Verse 8. She did what she could. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. That's the second symbol. In those days when someone died, they would anoint that body with perfume, and it had to do with preservation, and it smelled good, and that's how they would do that later to Jesus, just a little ways down the road. A week and 2 days later, Jesus would have died on the cross, and they put that perfume on there, 75 pounds of perfume and spices on Jesus' body. Jesus said, you're just preparing me for what is yet to come, right? This is the first perfume that I'm going to be anointed with because I'm going to die. But I like that verse, that sentence. She did what she could. This is also a theme in Jesus' whole gospel ministry. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be like that person or like that person. You don't have to have more money, more talents. You don't have to do all this. All you need to do is what you can do. And that's a gift, right? Because that makes me feel good. Because I'm not the best at anything, right? I'm not the best. I'm just Chris, right? I've got my faults, I've got my challenges, but what is Jesus concerned with? He did what he could, right? She did what she could. All of us have different gifts and talents and abilities. Jesus doesn't say you have to be like Allison, who can sing like gangbusters up here. You don't have to do that. You can just do what you can, right? We have different resources. We have different gifts and talents and abilities. Just do what you can do. Give 100% at what God has given to you. I love that. That's so comforting for me. Jesus pointed this out in all kinds of other places. When he was at the temple a while back, he saw this widow go up to the offering and give 2 small pennies. She did what she could. God honored that. Jesus honored that. He said, that's giving. It wasn't the amount, it was the heart, right? She did what she could. God is far more interested and impressed by our heart than what we do. He's concerned about how we do it and whether we're giving our best to Him with what we've got, right? We don't have to meet some standard, some human standard. God's standard is give your best. He pointed this out when they were at a crowd with thousands of people and they were hungry. And this little boy had 5 little loaves of bread and 2 little fish. And he did what he could. It wasn't much, but God took that little bit and He multiplied it to feed thousands, right? God took that little boy's food and He gave it, and He did what He could, and God blessed that. We see that all throughout the Bible. God's not impressed with our fancy words, our fancy clothes, right? In that time, in that era, He's not impressed with what status you have, how much money you have. Jesus was always impressed in people who did what they could with what they had. And that's great. You know, women in those days had a pretty tough go of things, didn't they? Right? Women in those days, 2,000 years ago, they were second-class citizens, right? They didn't have necessarily a lot of money or influence or power, right? They were kind of a lower tier of people back then. And yet in the Bible, especially in the Easter story, Jesus highlights women so many times because they're doing what they can, right? And this is a case of Mary doing what she could. And Jesus is like, that's going to be told. As long as the gospel is around, Mary's story will be told, right? And then we see when Jesus is on the cross, who's there? A whole bunch of women, right? There's a whole gang of women who were his followers, and Mark, actually John, says that these women, and he names all the women that were at the cross, it says they were supporters of Jesus. And actually they helped financially support Jesus' ministry. So Jesus was always highlighting people who didn't have much and yet did what they could. Of course, at the tomb, you know, it was the ladies who discovered that the tomb was empty, right? They were going to help finish the burial preparations, and it was the ladies who found out. Jesus is always pointing out people who have less than, but who step up to do all that they can, and he says, that I want to highlight, right? And he did this with the lepers and the sick and the poor and all kinds of people. Jesus is blessed when people do what they can for him. So, verse 9, he starts to wrap it up. He says, truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. And we're talking about it today, prophecy fulfilled. The gospel is still being told. Her story is still out there. And it closes with this. It starts, Mark chapter 14, starts with negative. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, they're out to kill him. It shows that beautiful gift of Mary, and it ends this ominous way as well. Verse 10 says this, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this, right? And promised to give him money. So the Pharisees and the religious leaders, how do we kill him? Oh, they're delighted now. They've got a plan. Their plan is coming into place because of Judas betrayed Jesus. So Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Do you see the contrast between Mary and Judas, right? Mary chose to give sacrificially. Mary chose to give sacrificially, and that led to fully living. However, Judas chose to take selfishly, and that led to spiritual and physical death. Mary chose to give, and that led to real life. Judas chose to receive, to get selfishly, and that led to spiritual death, and Judas would later take his own life because he felt so guilty about betraying Jesus. That is, Jesus turns things upside down, right? Selfishness will kill your soul. Serving will bring you fully alive. See, our culture says that you have to get things to be fully alive. The gospel says, no, you have to give to be fully alive. Jesus is always taking the cultural, sinful, and selfish nature and turning it upside down to say you thought the culture told you, everybody says that this is how you lived life to the fullest. I'm telling you, no. It's the exact opposite. And it's all through the Gospels. Mary is just one example, but Jesus taught about this all the time. Our culture tells us getting the best will bring us truly to life. But really giving your best leads to real life. So, where are you going to give your best? That's the question I want to talk to you about today. Where do you want to give your best as we get ready to close? And I want you to prayerfully think about what is most important to you. Because we can't give the best in everything, because then we'll be spread too thin and we'll just be mediocre, right? In everything. So think about what are the most important things to you. Because we're called to give our best at what is most important. So I want you to do a little inventory. And even pray, like, Holy Spirit, guide me. What's really the most important thing in my life? And the question is, am I giving my best at the things that are the most important? And pray for the Holy Spirit to guide you in that. What is it? And I could give you the obvious answers, but I want you to pray for it, right? I want the Holy Spirit to speak into your life. What are the most important things to me? And am I giving my best in those things? Sometimes I get distracted from the most important things, right? And I end up giving my best at things that don't matter most, and then the things that do matter most just get my leftovers. That's not what we want to do, right? What's most important, I want to give my best to that first, and if I have extra to give my best towards bombing down a mountain on my snowboard, that's great. That's a bonus, right? But first and foremost, give my best to the things that matter most. So who are you going to give your best to? What are you going to give your best to? And how are you going to do it? Right? How are you going to give your best? Mary had that perfume. That's what she had. Right? What do you have to give? What do you have to give in the things that matter most? Maybe it's your talents. Maybe it's your relationship abilities. Maybe it's your resources, right? Maybe it's your time. Of course, time is usually the most precious one. Give our time towards the things that matter most. Who are you going to give towards? What are you going to give towards? And how are you going to do it? Pray for God to guide you in that. I know for me, it always starts with my faith, right? So if I can give my best with my faith, it's going to be a strong foundation to give to all the other important things in my life. And that's why it's always wise to start with your faith, because your faith can be the foundation to stand on to then build your marriage and build your family and build your friendships and build your career and build your education, right? But faith is the strength that we need, faith in Jesus, to build all the other things in our lives. And this Easter season for me, I've been investing into my faith. And that's been important for me. I've been fasting. I've been praying. I've been taking time every morning to go through a Lent devotion, right? I've been investing into my faith first, and I'm hoping that helps give me the foundation to then invest into the other most important things in my life. And I'll tell you how, for me, in this time, when it comes to church, I really want to invest into church, but I'm telling you guys that life is not always easy, is it? Right? I mean, and we're investing into our marriages, our families, but it's not easy, but we want to give our best. I'm telling you guys, in the last 2 weeks, it's been one of the toughest times in church for me in the last 2 weeks. It has been. But I want to give 100% into it, right? And I want to pray for wisdom, right? I can give all the energy, right? I have endless energy. I can keep giving energy. But I want to pray to God for wisdom as I invest into this church, as I invest into my faith. And I'm thankful that I can do things like my morning devotions, that I can worship God with my worship playlist, right? That I can take time to pray and fast, because then God holds me up through the tough times in church. I'm thankful that I got to hang around with Aaron. You know, our denomination, ahead of our denomination in the USA. And man, we talked about everything. And that was such a needed time just to connect with a guy who's so wise, right? And who's been, he pastored a smaller church up in Oregon for 14 years. And I was just so blessed to be able to just chat with him about everything. But I'm telling you what, guys, I have faith that when I give 100%, God blesses that. When I sacrifice for Jesus, He blesses that, right? Is it easy? No, it's not. But we can have peace. We're given 100%. So where is that for you? So I'm going to ask our worship team to come on up here and get ready to close. And we're going to close with a song that